Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Dr. Cornel West. He is a former professor, author, actor, civil rights activist, and now presidential candidate for 2024 through the People's Party. Welcome back, Dr. West.
Well, what a blessing for me to be here. And I want to begin, like always, saluting you for your work, your courage, your vision, your perseverance, your forbearance, and the fact that you keep illuminating us and inspiring us. That's a beautiful thing in these grim days. No doubt about it. Hope you and your loved ones are doing well now.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. So last time you were here, I asked you if you would ever consider running for president as a third party candidate or independent. So you can imagine my excitement when I heard your announcement. I was very, very excited to hear that. And I'm curious. I said to myself, if Dr. West is running for president, he must feel that there is a sense of urgency for the American people. But I want to hear directly from you. Why did you decide to run for president? And how come you decided not to run through the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. No, it's true. I've said on a number of occasions that I would rather be in the crack house than the White House. The White House got more corruption than the crack house. Crack house, my brothers and sisters in there, they might be flying high in the friendly skies, but they can bounce back in ways and be forces of integrity, honesty, decency. White House people choose to be part of the empire. They choose to be part of the corrupt system and so forth. So it is true that, and I saw last night when you were kind enough to have me on from a few months ago, where I talked about, if my calling is one in which I would do anything. If I had to write a song in a chord I never conceived of to be a force for poor and working people, I'd try to write that song, because that's where I come from. That's what my vocation is. That's what I'm put on the earth to do. And so when I looked and saw the low point, the nadir that we're at, and I didn't see anybody on the national scene, intellectual politics, really bringing insight to bear and witness to the legacies of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and Fannie Lou Hamers and Ella Bakers and Rabbi Heschels and Edward Zaid's and Dorothy Days and Grace Lee Boggs and Luisa Moreno, one of the greatest freedom fighters, a Latino sister who's deported to Guatemala. I say to myself, that's the wind at my back. Who is being true to that legacy, which does what? Put the suffering and resilience and resistance of poor and working people, no matter what color, here and around the world, at the center of your vision and your analysis. And that's just what it is to be part of a tradition. It's like being a jazz musician. If I'm playing the saxophone, how do I keep alive the legacy of Charlie Parker and Coltrane? I don't care what everybody else is blowing. I know what the standards are. How do I keep the legacy of a Sarah Vaughan and a Billie Holiday if I'm a jazz vocalist? That's what the standards are. And that's how you view yourself. So you're not worried about the vicious attacks. You're not worried about the misunderstandings and so forth. You learn and listen from people, but you actually headed forward. So I decided, I said, well, let me make this move. Let me make this leap. And I tell you, I would have never known we'd have this kind of response. You know what I mean? 4 days ago, I'm just, walking around, finishing my teaching at Union Seminary and listening to Curtis Mayfield, reading much of Toni Morrison, right? Now, good God Almighty, there's 18 million on this video hits and all that. It's like, good God Almighty, 5 or 6 shows a day. It's like, hey, keep the focus where it belongs. What's happening on the West Bank? What's happening in the landless peasants in Brazil? What's happening in the hood? What's happening on the reservation? What's happening to poor white brothers and sisters in Appalachia? What's happening to trade union movement getting crushed? What's happening to the sisters dealing with domestic violence? The vicious attack on our precious trans? How do we keep the focus where it belongs? And one of the ways of doing that is running to be head of the empire in order to dismantle the empire in the name of poor and working people.
Well said, Dr. West. What are your thoughts on, because I know you came from the Bernie movement, what are your thoughts on Bernie Sanders and some of the members of the squad choosing to endorse Joe Biden? Jamal Bowman said recently at an event in DC that we have to drag this guy over the finish line. And my question was, why do you have to drag him? Why not just choose someone else? How do you feel about them choosing to endorse Joe Biden instead of choosing to endorse candidates like yourself or like Marianne Williamson, those that are running on the progressive issues that they actually agree with?
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, one is, I mean, I'll always have a deep love for Brother Bernie. You know what I mean? We've been through hell and high water together. We can have some disagreements, even deep ones, and still be brothers. I think he missed his moment when he could have broken from the milquetoast neoliberal Democratic Party, the corporate-dominated Democratic Party, and constituted a third wave. He decided not to. That's him. You know, I come from a tradition of black folks. Just lift every voice. He ain't got to be an echo of a silo. He can go on and lift his voice. I can hear the voice and say, well, no, I ain't going that way. I'm not going that way, Brother Bernie. That's not me. Like we fought against BDS in regard to Israel and Palestine. He was against it. I was for it. We worked together. We argued and so forth. Reparations. I was for reparations. He was against it. We struggled over it together and still were able to come together and be forces for good. But I think they're wrong. I think that I was in their same position when I defended Biden, because I thought at that time that the fascist takeover would shatter any possibilities for democracy. But then I began to rethink. I reread Glenn Ford, and I reread Brother Juma Baraka, and I reread Margaret Kimberly, and I reread a host of others saying, you don't really defeat fascism by having caretaker, milquetoast, neoliberal administration. The fascism sooner or later is going to take over if that's all you have to offer. If you can't speak to the needs of the people who are following neo-fascist Pied Pipers, then that fascism sooner or later is going to be the dominant one no matter what. And if the only argument you can put forward is, I'm not the almighty, but I am the alternative, I say, Brother Biden, get off the crack pipe, man. What you talking about? You tied to war crimes in Iraq. You tied to war crimes as one of the architects of the mass incarceration regime, which was one of the most vicious attacks on the history of black people. You tied to various crimes supporting Wall Street rather than homeowners. Don't talk about I'm the only alternative. What does that mean? That means that poor people and working people will get pushed to the margins no matter what. That means that the precious Palestinian folk on the West Bank, when the bombs hit, it be the Democratic Party, Republican Party, those are still precious people, innocent people and children getting killed. That's the vantage point from which you look at what it means to be a force for good in politics, Brother Biden. But he's not alone, because neoliberalism is so pervasive. We saw it in Atlanta just the other day, right? Look at all the black folk for Cop City. Look at all of them across the board. And they know that's the militarization of the police that's going to have vicious attacks, not just on black people, on poor people and working people across the board. But somehow they're supposed to embrace that and still act as if they part of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer and so forth. I said, no. Same when I choose Brother Bowman. Now, Jamal, I supported Brother Jamal, absolutely. But brother, if you're going to support Biden, tell the truth about Biden. Oh, you want stability? You want stability for the grotesque wealth inequality, for austerity, for brothers and sisters of all colors on food stamps, but expand the military? Don't tell lies about Biden. Be honest about it. He's a hypocrite.
That's right.
Cowardly when it comes to fighting for black people. He can make a deal with the brother from West Virginia, the senator, what's his name?
Joe Manchin.
That's it, brother. He could make a deal with Brother Manchin, but can't make a deal with Brother Manchin when it comes to voting rights being at stake and pushing aside the filibuster bill. You say, oh, it's clear who you are. That's your priority. Oh, you got a different way of looking at the world than I do. And I don't have to accommodate myself to you. I accommodate myself to the needs of the people. Poor people, working people. I don't care where they are, not just in the United States, around the world. That's a different kind of orientation. You see what I mean?
I totally hear you. Totally hear you on that. One of the things I really like is your campaign platform. I
Mm.
love what you have here. First and foremost, create true democracy. Immediately, you express clean out government corruption. I think that is a big one. Ban corporate lobbying, revitalizing our economy. You talk about living wage and housing, of course, Medicare for all, ending the wars. That's a really big one for, at least for me and for a lot of other people that watch the show as well. Expand civil liberties, which mentions ending surveillance, the drug war, mass incarceration, also regulating AI and breaking up big tech. That's a big one. And protecting the environment. One of the ones that really stood out to me, and I would like for you to explain to people who may not be aware, disband NATO. So I 100% agree with that. Could you explain to people who may not fully understand, because I've been to anti-war rallies before where we've had signs say disband NATO and people will walk by and say, are you crazy? Can you explain to people why you think it's important that we disband NATO?
Well, I think we can see that very clearly in the situation in Ukraine right now. You got precious Ukrainian brothers and sisters who are suffering in ways we don't have a language for. We're always in solidarity with anybody who suffers. And you say, how did we find ourselves in a situation where the American empire promised Gorbachev, as the Soviet empire was dissolving, that NATO would not move 1 inch? And there was a consensus among Russian elites, right-wing, center, and progressive. If NATO moved 1 inch, like any empire, they would not only feel provoked, but they would feel as if the backs were being pushed against the walls. Fast forward to a few years later, 14 ex-Soviet countries are part of NATO, right on the border with missiles pointed toward Russia. Now, Putin's a gangster. I think we know that. No doubt about that. But if the United States had missiles in Mexico or Canada or Cuba or Venezuela, the U.S. government would have blown them to smithereens the first day. That's how empires proceed. An empire is an empire. It's predatory. It's greedy. It's obsessed with its own territory and its geopolitical interests and so forth. So the United States knew that they were pushing Russia against the wall. And then you end up with a war with our precious Ukrainian brothers and sisters with an invasion. Now, the invasion is a crime against humanity. There's no doubt about that. But when you pushed, and this is not a rationalization of Putin at all, it is his imperial response to the U.S. imperial use of NATO as an instrument of U.S. global power. And that's just a matter of truth. You could be actually conservative, centrist. We saw the piece in Harper's Magazine with Brother Benjamin Schwartz and the others telling the same story. They're not leftists. They're trying to be honest about Stephen Cohen, one of the great Russian historians, taught at Princeton and NYU for many years. He said the same thing. You know, Sister Katrina, his wife, who was the publisher of Nation magazine. They said the same thing. But they were viewed as what? Oh, they must be Russian spies, Russian informers. You don't want to hear the truth. And so when I talk about NATO, what I'm saying is there's other ways of ensuring the safety of European nations other than having institutions that are the instruments of U.S. global power. And the Europeans are the ones who have to pay the price. And we headed toward what? Possible nuclear war.
Yep.
Hey, that's serious business. Possible blowing up of nuclear energy centers. That's serious business. Serious business. You see what I mean? And so, it's just a matter of, I said from the very beginning, that it's not just a campaign. I think every human being with integrity, honesty, and decency wants to be a force for good in the language of John Coltrane, and therefore wants to be a quester for truth and a quester for justice. I don't even think it's a matter of just ideology. I really don't. I really don't. It would be like apartheid in South Africa. You ain't got to be no leftist to be in solidarity with black folk getting degraded and subjugated and exploited like that. If you're a decent human being with any morality and spiritual sensibility, you're going to be upset. You're going to have a fire inside you to want to fight against it. Same is true with the Palestinian brothers and sisters. And everybody knows, oh my God, if there's a Palestinian occupation of Jewish brothers and sisters, boycott, the divestment, sanctions would be on the cutting edge, and those who supported it would be receiving moral prizes. And I simply say to them that my solidarity with my Jewish brothers and sisters under a Palestinian occupation, I have the same morality and spirituality in regard to Palestinians under a vicious Israeli occupation. Because occupation, exploitation is wrong. If you had black folks occupying and subjugating white brothers and sisters, it's wrong. I'm in solidarity with the white brothers. So the white brothers and sisters occupying and exploit black folk, I'm with the black folk. Now, granted, I got a little bias toward black folk because my mom is black and my dad is black and so forth. But all human beings have the potential to be gangsters and thugs. And that's one of the things that a lot of our Jewish brothers and sisters have to recognize. You see, they've been underdogs for so long. We understand it. 2,000 years of hatred, chronic hatred and pogroms and Holocaust, beyond language in terms of the evil. But you can have an underdog mentality, but be a top dog vis-a-vis Palestinians, and therefore think you have the right to treat them anyway to preserve your way of life. No, that's wrong. And somebody's got to say it. Not one member of the Democratic Party can come forward and say it in a serious way other than our sister from Detroit, Rashida, and a few others, but not too many. And you say, well, how are you going to have a party with no commitment to the truth on these issues? The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. If you don't allow that suffering to speak, you live in a lie or a half lie. And the same is true with justice. The same is true with justice. Justice, what love looks like in public and deep democracy is what justice looks like in praxis. Just like tenderness is what love feels like in private.
Well said. Well said, Dr. West. One thing I noticed, so I know you and I talked about this before. We talked about like reparations, and I said I felt like Bernie Sanders should have had that a part of his platform. Do you think that you would implement reparations as a part of your platform? And if so, would part of that be cash payments as well?
Well, one, I've been part of reparation committees for over 35 years, going back to the days of the great Randall Robinson, who just passed, as you know, in Virgin Islands. He was at Harvard Law when I was at Harvard College, and we were part and parcel of the takeover of the president's office, given the investments in Angola at that time. And he's the founder of Trans-Africa, primarily committed to reparations. So for over 40 years, I've been fundamentally committed to reparations. Why? Because I'm committed to truth and justice. I think we ought to know what is the truth in terms of what happened to black folk enslaved, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, lynched, discriminated against, degraded. And once you find that truth, how do you repair it? It's like tort law. How do you repair it? That's justice. So it's not any kind of special preference. It's not any kind of black folk having some special assets. No, we want to know the truth, and then justice has to do to how do you repair it. And how do you repair it? What form does it take? It could take cash. It's taking cash in other cases of reparation and so forth, you see. And there we look to the William Dohertys and others who have been thinking about this thing for 30, 35 years. And that's why I actually overlap strongly with Brother Antonio and Sister Yvette with ADOS. And a lot of people, got deep questions about ADOS and so forth. I was there with them the first convention. I'll be there in terms of reparations. Then I go on to tell them, and they've heard me say on many occasions, in my deep support of reparations in terms of those who are descendants of American descendants of slaves, that I don't want any anti-immigrant sensibility. Don't turn those who once called themselves Negroes against those who are from the Caribbean or those who are from Ethiopia and so forth. We have a solidarity, a moral and a spiritual solidarity. We might have distinctive histories. Bob Marley ain't the same as Curtis Mayfield, even though his group imitated Curtis when he came out. But he come out of Jamaica. Jamaica got its own rich, deep history, but they on the reggae. They ain't on to Choice of Colors. They ain't on to Superfly. So the thing is that we have to understand that we can pursue reparations for African descendants of slaves, even as we embrace fair treatment of immigrants from Mexico and Haiti and Honduras and so on. We don't need to be xenophobic as we also call for our reparations. And that's part of the rich discussion within ADOS, and that's very important. But I just throw that out because a lot of times when you come out for reparations, people think somehow you're turning your back or somehow putting less value on the suffering of others.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Whereas it's more about a debt that's owed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the name of Randall Robinson's great book, The Debt. You know, and even Brother Coates. I've had my disagreements with my dear Brother Coates. He's a brilliant brother, but his essay on reparations that was in, I think it was Atlantic magazine a few years ago. Very important statement. All voices can be used and mobilized for good. Very much so.
Dr. West, I'm sure you've seen this. Recently, there has been a lot of information that's come out over the past couple of months about government agencies like the FBI and the CIA obviously being involved in censorship. A lot of that was revealed in the Twitter files with the help of Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, to name a few journalists that handled that project. RFK Jr. has heavily come out to criticize the CIA. I'm sure you've heard his story about what he thinks happened to his father and his uncle. Would you be willing to call out some of those agencies and why or why not? Because when I think of the FBI, immediately I think of Fred Hampton. I think of the other Black Panthers, Black Panther Party. I think of Malcolm X's family came forward recently. They're filing a lawsuit against them in reference to Malcolm X's death. Do you think you'd be willing to call out those government agencies and why or why not?
Well, one, call out and clean up. See, I come out chocolate side of Sacramento, California, Glen Elder, West Family, Shiloh Baptist Church, Black Panther Party right next door. I worked with them for 6 years. Breakfast program, Jamaica Plain, when I was in college in Cambridge. You see, the prison program in Norfolk, the same prison where Malcolm himself was. Meaning what? I haven't got over the murder of Bobby Hutton. June 6, 1968, 2 days after Brother Martin was shut down like a dog in Memphis. That's FBI, that's J. Edgar Hoover, that's COINTELPRO. We know that. I'm blessed to travel with Brother Stokely Carmichael, known as Kwame Ture, on many occasions. Had long discussions about what was going on in terms of FBI, and we ain't even got to the CIA and Lumumba yet. You see, so that it's a matter of casting a spotlight, cleaning out, and telling folk, okay, if you're concerned about protecting and serving the people, rather than containing those you view as radicals in order to preserve the empire, then you're in the wrong organization. You're in the wrong. This is what it means to proceed by dismantling empire in the name of the empowerment of those Stone called everyday people. That's what radical democracy is. That's what deep democracy is. And so any structure of domination, and as we know, it comes in a whole lot of different colors. A whole lot of Brother Sharpton the other day. You remember the Tyree funeral? He said, I'm going to tell you what Martin Luther King Jr. saw when he went to the mountaintop. He got up there and he saw Barack Obama. He saw Camilla Harris. No, Brother Sharpton, love you, but get off the crack pipe again. That's not what Martin saw on that mountaintop. No. What did he see, Brother West? I don't know, but he didn't see that. What he probably saw was new pharaohs in new colors, generating forms of accommodation to empire, predatory capitalism, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, and white supremacy on local, regional, and global levels. He saw African bourgeoisie not responding to the plight of poor working class Africans. He saw the black bourgeoisie turning its back for the most part, being indifferent to those brothers and sisters locked into mass incarceration and decrepit schools, indecent housing, not access to health care, communities shattered with market-driven obsessions with guns and drugs, and unable to even generate the kind of quality relations before they die That's the kind of brother Martin Luther King Jr. was. That's what he was looking at. And he said, in the midst of that, I still think we gonna make it. Oh my God, Martin, why you believe that? Because I come from a great people who for 400 years have been dealing with chronic hatred and still dishing out love warriors like myself and like Toni Morrison, like James Baldwin and like A. Philip Randolph. And we ain't even got to John Coltrane's Love Supreme yet. I come from a people who've been terrorized but never formed a black version of the Ku Klux Klan would produce Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. I come from a people been so traumatized. And yet here come these wounded healers like Ella Fitzgerald, like Aretha, like Donny Hathaway. And we ain't got to Luther Vandross yet. We ain't got to the dramatics and the delphonics and the emotions. How do these wounded healers and joy spreaders keep coming out of all of this? Martin said, I've been to the mountaintop. That's the best of a great people. And we're losing that. That's what I was telling folk today. That's the tradition. That if we don't get back to that, we lose everything. We lose American democracy. We lose the ability to have quality relations. We lose the species. We lose the planet. All of the cosmos in so many ways has the blues. We better learn something from the blues people. And I'm not saying it's a matter of skin pigmentation, because again, we got a lot of black gangsters and thugs, and I got a lot of gangsters in me. I'm working it out every day. But I can tell you this, that it's hard to find a people who have not been the leaven in a democratic loaf more so than the Black freedom struggle. And that's a gift to the world. Just like Black music is the greatest artistic breakthrough of the most barbaric century of recorded time is the 20th century, about Jewish brothers and sisters, communists, socialists, gays, lesbian, working people, peasants, murdered, killed, 150 million. Here come the blues. Here come jazz. We're going to look at catastrophe. We're going to keep the swing, and we're going to be improvisational enough to keep on keeping on regardless of what the evidence says. What a great tradition. I'm just a little small part of that tradition coming out of Irene B. West and Cliff, my father, made his contribution.
Well said. Last night we did a poll on this show to see who people would vote for. There was over 1,000 votes. You were in first place, 65%. And right behind you is RFK Jr. at 31%. And I'm curious, this got me to thinking, actually, there is some overlap between you and RFK Jr. in reference to the policies that you support. Do you think you would ever be interested in having some type of collaboration with him, maybe on like an anti-war issue, so to speak?
Well, we've already had many collaborations. He and his wonderful family have always been so kind, reached out to me. We used to meet there, Las Vegas. We used to have this wonderful gathering of lawyers concerned about environmental racism and so forth. We were on panels together. I have great love and respect for the brother in his own way. I mean, I was disappointed to see him backing down so quickly. I thought he was even spineless the way he backed away from Brother Roger Waters. Though I said, come on, Brother Kennedy. Now. Hey, you know, Patricia Sullivan's wonderful book on RFK. It's a wonderful book. RFK at the very end, he's trying to be courageous. He'd already put the FBI on Martin, wrong as he can be, but he's trying to bounce back. And he was bouncing back. I say, RFK Jr., you got to take a stand in the face of truth. Don't let these folk tell you anti-Semitic or somehow you downplaying the plight and predicament of Jewish brothers and sisters. You can love Jewish brothers and sisters and come to their defense, and very much like me say, Jewish security is crucial, indispensable. It's a requisite for any movement forward. But that Jewish security must go hand in hand with Palestinian dignity, with Palestinian justice. It is not either or. So when I saw him in the parade, I said, oh, Lord, here come these Democratic Party politicians again. They're confusing improvisation, which is a species of practical wisdom, but it's still grounded in courage, with opportunism. And opportunism is finding out what you believe after somebody puts pressure on you and pushes you in a certain direction. It's the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat. If you're just going to check and see what the climate of opinion is and simply reflect it, rather than be a thermostat and shape it, then you're not really ready to be the kind of leader for poor and working people that we want. So I've got much to learn from the brother. He's a brilliant brother. We've got a lot of overlap. But I think when you're running for president, you can't let these lobbies, I don't care what they are tied, you can't let these lobbies dictate your judgment. Can you imagine a jazz musician sitting there getting ready to play his trumpet and got to check with somebody else about which notes? Hey, no, get off the stage. Go back home and work on your scales. You know what I mean? That's the standard. That's the standard. So yes, I think I can work very much with my dear brother, RFK Jr. And his family is one that I have always had a fondness for, especially given the suffering, and so on. But when I've seen that, and I haven't heard him really come out for Medicare for all. I mean, there's a number of things that I think I would put pressure on him. But he's got the right orientation in regard to domestic policy. Oh, there's no doubt about that. And he's done a wonderful job as a lawyer. He really has. He's been a force for good as a lawyer dealing with environmental racism.
Well said. I want to ask you about this statement in reference to Ron DeSantis. So some people are, just let you know, some people are criticizing this, and I want to get your opinion, or if you could explain to people what you meant by your statement here. In this article, it says DeSantis revolutionary defense of the classics. And so this was written by you and Jeremy Tate, May 2023. And it's this statement here where it says, that's why Mr. DeSantis' support of classic education has universal merit that transcends partisanship. Education based on values, logic, and discipline isn't Republican, it's timeless. I want to give you the opportunity to explain to people what you mean by that, because some people are criticizing this because of Ron DeSantis' recent actions in reference to education and censorship.
No, I appreciate you giving me that opportunity, because you see, as a jazz man, I try to be very honest and candid about particular issues that I work on and find overlap with folk who I have deep disagreements with. And so Brother Jeremy Tate and I have been working on trying to make sure that classical education, by classical education, I mean from Socrates to Toni Morrison. I mean from Sophocles to James Baldwin. I'm talking about the most powerful formulations of what it means to be human. From Timbuktu to Oxford to Howard to Morehouse to the Sorbonne. Attempts of human beings to come to terms with all of the issues of death and dread and despair and disappointment. And I've seen the dumbing down of education. So what happens is, in those contexts, I do in fact find myself with some deeply conservative folk. And I try to tell them, hey, let's tell the truth now. Let's be honest. When Martin Luther King Jr. is in that Birmingham jail talking about Socrates, he is understanding the relation of Socrates, who also died of the hemlock after being in jail, to his situation. And so when it comes to DeSantis, that's the 2% of the time I would agree with him, because he indeed brought in the classic education test to accent that classical education. I have a deep commitment to classical education to make sure we sustain the highest levels. And it's always cuts across cultures, cuts across civilizations. It's African, it's indigenous peoples, it's Latin American, it's European, it's Asian, and so forth. 98% of the time, he's a xenophobe. He's a cowardly manipulator of various cultural wars. And he himself, he's Ivy League trained and acting like he comes out of some proletarian context or something. I said, wait a minute, brother DeSantis, why don't you be honest with yourself? But he's running for president. He learned much from Trump, and Trump has just helped gangsterize the whole terrain. It was already corrupt, but he's now gangsterized it in that way. And so DeSantis feels as if he has to play that role. And so 98% of the time, I have deep disagreements. Now, I must say the title, I think, was ridiculous. I didn't choose the title. That was the Wall Street Journal. Brother Jeremy called me up and said he didn't like the title either. But we're always working on classical education. Same is true with my dear brother, Robbie George, where I have very deep disagreements. And yet at the same time, I got a deep love for the brother. And so we work together on a variety of issues. And then we fight on a whole host of other issues as well. And I don't mind being pushed against the wall by folk who think I need to be all on their side. Well, see, I don't proceed like that. I don't proceed. It's like looking at Clarence Thomas, and I agree with him about 99% of the time. But when I see Clarence Thomas, I still see a beautiful black man aesthetically. It reminds me of my grandfather. You see, a beautiful black man can be a force against justice, against freedom, as I understand it. So I have profound disagreements with him. We fight. I've never fought physically or nothing, you see. But when I see him, I don't first see just all of the ugly things associated with his policies. I can still stay in contact with his humanity, even as I know he's my political foe and my ideological enemy. And that's just how I proceed. That's how I choose to be in the world. Everybody doesn't have to do that, Everybody doesn't have to do that. But that's just how I choose to be. That's the kind of horn I'm blowing. Or like Mary Lou Williams, that's the kind of piano I'm playing. And I'm going to go down like that. You know what I mean? I'm going to go down like that. That's how I was raised by Irene and Clifton and Shiloh Baptist Church and the Panther Party. I've never remembered the Panther Party because I'm revolutionary Christian, they atheistic and things. So we used to have our wonderful discussions about religion as opium of the people and the way in which they had a preacher every week who was selling out the people. And they were right. Many of those preachers did. Ain't no doubt about that. I still want to get some lawyers and pharmacists and doctors up there. No, we're going to focus on the preachers because they're so important in our community. And then what happens? Well, when they had the breakfast program, they go to the black churches. Why? Because there's a prophetic slice of the black church that's in solidarity with the Panthers. I said, yes, go to St. Augustine. Go to Allen Temple, J. Alfred Smith, who was Huey Newton's pastor. And who was Huey Newton's father? Reverend Walter Newton, pastor of Bethel Baptist Church, Monroe, Louisiana. Baddest black man in the city. Police wouldn't touch him. His son, just like him. Ooh, interesting. Very fascinating. The very source of your strength can come out of an institution you have deep disagreements with in terms of its beliefs. That's exactly right. Very much so.
You're better than me, Dr. West. When I look at Clarence Thomas, I see Uncle Ruckus from the Boondocks.
I can understand because and there's a strong element of truth in that. But you can imagine also when you see Clarence Thomas, if he looks exactly like your uncle, you say, ooh, I got to really distinguish between Uncle Johnny and old Uncle Remus Clarence, because what his face and his the way he proceeds is something that has a resonance within my own cultural formation. See? Even though politically and ideologically I'm going at him tooth and nail, but you see the point I'm making. It's a matter of finding something that allows you to stay in contact with the humanity of others, so that it leaves you open to some sense of possibility, so that you're never ever feeling as if you're fatalistic about anybody. You see, if Elijah Muhammad were fatalistic about Malcolm and Malcolm little remained the gangster that he was, we never would have had Malcolm X. Elijah loved him into Malcolm X, and then he had to outgrow Elijah and continue to become one of the greatest freedom fighters of the 20th century. You see what I mean? But if we gave up on Malcolm Little, no Malcolm X, well, we need Malcolm. I can't conceive of myself without Malcolm X. No, I don't exist. That's like trying to conceive of myself without Fannie Lou Hamer. I can just hear this little light of mine and Fannie Lou singing all the time. They try to beat her down, and she just keep on coming back with all of her style and her smile and her song. Yes, that's my kind of human being and freedom fighter.
So, Dr. West, you're running through the People's Party. There have been a number of issues with the People's Party, as I'm sure you know. There have been allegations of sexual harassment against Nick Brana, who's the chair of the People's Party. I interviewed Nick Brana and his accuser, Zeneb, on this show as well. There have been issues that have been released from former volunteers. Actually, they've come forward and said that there were allegations of racism in reference to the People's Party in a Slack group. And there have also been complaints about mismanagement of finances on Nick Brana's end, and as well as his father. So I understand, every party has its issues, but I'm curious, why did you decide to run through the People's Party, and how do you see this party evolving going forward?
No, I appreciate that question. I just felt we had to find a third way. The two-party system is a major impediment for the empowerment of poor and working people. The Green Party, I have great respect for. I have tremendous love for Brother Ralph Nader in terms of his example in public service and so forth. I supported him when he ran 2004. Sister Jill Stein, I also supported him. Brother Ajumu Baraka, I mean, he's my brother. He ran vice president for Green Party with Jill Stein. So that I have some connection, but I'm not a member of it. I have no real sense of what it would actually even be like to go through the process. I didn't see any other independent institutions. I was on the ground floor of the founding of the People's Party when they broke from Brother Bernie in 2016. I was there with my dear sister Nina Turner and so many others. You pointed out last night that beautiful picture that you had. And so I was thoroughly convinced that the People's Party certainly struck me as an institutional vehicle for me to be able to promote a truth and pursue a truth and a justice. But you're right, I was certainly aware of the ugly moments and aware of the faults and aware of some of the charges. Now, I don't like to adjudicate in public about guilt and innocence and so forth. I really don't. But I want to take very, very seriously any claims about sexual harassment or what have you, or about racism and so forth and so on. But I was still convinced that the People's Party can be an institutional vehicle for something so much bigger than those particular things without trying to erase or eliminate them. And so with the campaign, I said, well, let us embark and see what the Lord has in store, see what kind of history we can make. And I do hope and pray that people give the campaign a chance to be the kind of force for good that it can be. And I wouldn't be running without the People's Party reaching out. So I acknowledge that very much so. Nick Brown is the founder of the party. I acknowledge that, but he's a cracked vessel, just like I'm a cracked vessel and everybody else. And all of us have to be accountable. All of us have to be accountable. But I just hope that the powers that be, especially the corporate media, especially the neoliberal elites, they're going to find anything they can to try to bring you down, any distraction that they can. The whole culture of neoliberalism is a culture of mass distraction. So you won't talk about Wall Street power. You won't talk about Pentagon power. You won't really hit police power. Even if you have some demonstrations and have some symbolic bills, the Democratic Party has never been fundamentally serious about ending mass incarceration. It helped create it in a fundamental way, including it Joe Biden himself. He's the architect of that crime against humanity. That's what mass incarceration is. I've taught in prisons for 41 years. It's a crime against humanity. And the question becomes, when you understand it in that way, what you gonna do about it? Well, Democratic Party has kept on moving. Big tech, globalization, obsession with markets, all the different contexts for luxury and all of the cycling of the status and spectacle, and the masses of people. 60% of Americans living check by check, month by month. What happens to their suffering? That's why I'm also going straight into Trump country, straight into it. And I'm gonna tell those white brothers and sisters, y'all are vanilla brothers and sisters who are catching hell. You're wounded, you're scarred. Why you're following a neo-fascist Pied Piper Why don't you confront the most powerful rather than scapegoat the most vulnerable? Why would you be cowardly to want to attack me, gay brothers, lesbian sisters, Jews, Muslims, Arabs, trans, women, and then side with a neo-fascist gangster with Brother Trump? Please, let us present to you an alternative. Well, we hate Biden, not hating the person. We hate the professional managerial class. They're arrogant. They're condescending. They are arrogant. They are condescending. New York Times, Washington Post, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they specialize, not in all of them, but specialize in creating a culture of arrogance and condescension vis-a-vis working people. The mass majority of Americans never go to college, never set a foot in college. You see, well, that's in a democracy. You're embracing everybody, and I begin with the least of these. I begin with the poor and working class. You see, so we're going straight into Trump country because, as I said before, you can't defeat trash of fascism with milquetoast neoliberalism. Never. All you're gonna have is just a little caretaker government every 4 years that's postponing the collapse of democracy because the fascists sooner or later will take over. You got to create alternative visions, alternative passion with infrastructure and organization so you can rechannel the frustrations and the rage so they don't follow neo-fascist Pied Pipers. They follow radically democratic servants who are humble enough to try to convince them and persuade them, also bring power and pressure, but don't have a minute of any patience with hatred of Black people, of brown people, or immigrants.
So one of the things that I mentioned was mismanagement of finances, and I know this wasn't on your end, your responsibility, right. But one of the concerns that has been brought my way from people is that they are cautious of, if let's say they do donate like to your campaign, because you're aligned with the People's Party and they've heard about issues of mismanagement of finances before. Some people are cautious that if that money gets into the hands of Nick Brana and his father, some people are concerned that it's not going to be used in the proper way. Again, I know this isn't on you, but other people have told me that they would be more likely to support if Nick Brana were to step down as chair of this party. How can you reassure people that something like that would not happen, that those funds would not go in a different direction?
No, I appreciate the question too. I mean, one is that we've got a board is going to be a board that's even stronger with towering figures like Brother Chris Hedges, who I have tremendous love and respect for. Sister Medea Benjamin, I have tremendous love and respect for. These are tried and true freedom. I'm just mentioning two, you see, who constitute a mechanism of overseeing. But most importantly, you know, in a campaign, you got to count for every penny. Yes. By law. See, that's a very different situation with a party. But in a campaign, you have to count for every penny. So people shouldn't have any worry in that regard. But I do hear what you're saying. And I just think that, you know, we've got to somehow, on the one hand, speak to it strong enough so that people will then be able to focus on what we're really about, which is trying to raise our voices, be motion, momentum, movement, and campaign to try to bring our critiques to bear on the empire, the militarism abroad, all the crucial issues that we talk about, the greed of Wall Street, trying to seriously defend the rights of trade unions. We got this summer major strikes coming up. It's going to be very clear, exposing which side people are on. Be right there. Let the working folk know of all colors, all genders, all sexual orientation. We are with you. Biden, where are you? Railroad strike. Where are you, Brother Joe? You're on the wrong side. And that's just one small example of that. Same would be true in terms of ecological collapse that's happening right now. We see the results in part in our northeastern cities and northeastern regions and so on. You see, and I mean, you know, there's just so many variety of different issues, but I do always connect foreign policy with domestic policy. It's Very important to connect the militarizing of other parts of the world in Cop City, the militarizing of police, the militarizing of schools, the militarizing of our civil society, and how that reinforces the gangsterizing. And when you gangsterize a society, it's hard to generate trust and solidarity. And you end up with survival of the slickest. And the wealthy always went out with a divide and conquer strategy so that poor people and working people are at each other's throats as the top 1% that has wealth equivalent to the bottom 90%. We got 3 individuals with wealth equivalent to the bottom 50%. But that, if that's not morally obscene, I don't know what is.
So one of the issues for third party and independent candidates is ballot access. Like, so everyone we know, like Jill Stein had to go through this, et cetera. With the People's Party, it appears, last I checked, they had ballot access, I think maybe in Florida and Virginia. Some people are asking, what is the strategy? Is the strategy running through the People's Party to run a write-in campaign where people will write in your name on the ballot if you don't get ballot access in all the other states? Or is the strategy more so to build a third party movement to get the ground like going and then open it up to other options? So I think that's one of the biggest concerns for people is just how do we vote for Dr. West if the People Party doesn't have ballot access the way that the Green Party does?
Absolutely. And one of the great contributions of Ralph Nader was, remember, he began in February and still was able to get over 40 states. And that was February, right before the election in November. We're starting now 16 months ahead. You see, so when we look at 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, some of these states, 3,000 signatures, 4,000 signatures, 6,000 signatures. Once you get your campaign moving and your folk in place, you get those signatures and the states begin to kick in. So it's not static or stationary, right? Where we begin now is just 2 or 3 days into, and we out of the blocks, as you know. Ooh, we out of the blocks fast. I didn't think we'd be out of the blocks like this in terms of the impact, coverage, range, and so forth and so on. But now you had to translate that institutionally and infrastructurally, state by state. And what you need are those folk out there, volunteers and others, gaining those signatures. And that's what we're planning to do day by day, week by week. But most importantly, it's a matter of choosing what kind of human being you want to be from your mama's womb to tomb. And that's not just a matter of winning overnight. This is not push button strategy. This is not a boomtown panacea. When you choose to live a certain life, where you have a genuine love of folk catching hell, then you pace yourself. You're a long distance runner, and you know you can't do it by yourself. You have to have comrades, friends, companions, loved ones, so you constitute communities. And if you're lucky, you can create a major movement. Why? Because the powers that be will do everything they can to crush it. But the powers that be are mighty, they're not almighty. That's the history of the species. When they try to wipe out and suffocate all the love, all the justice, all the integrity, all the generosity, it just keeps seeping through the cracks. It's like Tupac's mama, who wrote that wonderful book, The Rose That Came Through the Crack in the Concrete. Here come little Tupac. What you got to say, Tupac? So many tears. Woo! Thug life, so many tears. My voice will be heard. It cannot be snuffed out. That's just one grand example of freedom fighters of all colors who confront domination and say, domination, you are mighty, but you're not almighty. You will not have the last word. And sometimes all it is just, dear mama, so many tears.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions I had in reference to the Green Party, because obviously this is another question that a lot of people have been asking. The Green Party, while it has its issues too, there were allegations of the Green Party rigging their primary for Howie Hawkins. It seems that there is some type of a rift with the Howie Hawkins faction of that party. I am curious, Did the Green Party reach out to you and ask you to run for president under the Green Party for 2024?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. But they shouldn't have. They shouldn't have. I had a wonderful dialogue with Brother Howard. I've known him for many, many years when he ran before. And as I say, I mean, I just have a great respect for different comrades. You know what I mean? It gets me in trouble. I mean, you got a Revolutionary Communist Party, my dear brother Carl Dix. I've been to jail so many times we can't count. My sister Sarah Taylor. He's my brother and she's my sister. You know, and even Brother Ovakian, you know, even Maoist, he running the Revolutionary Communist Party. When I'm in prison, their folk are in prison. When we in the streets together. When we go to jail, we in jail together. We have deep disagreements on things, but we got a love for poor people and working people, you see. And so I'm not one to be running around scared of associating with different groups and so forth. I'm a free black man. I don't have any of these problems of being able to connect with other groups and tell them where I disagree and where I agree and so forth and so on. You have to be able to be in anybody's house, White House, crack house, your mama's house, preserve your integrity, honesty, and decency, and be the force for good you are in whatever context. And everybody falls on their faces. But so I'm not one to ever, as you can imagine, you know, I'd never trash, you know, a Green Party, a People's Party, a Revolutionary Communist Party, Angela Davis's old Communist Party when I first met her. I was never in love with the Soviet Union. I was glad they supported decolonization and so forth. But no, I'm not one. We're going to treat our Jewish brothers and sisters unfair in the Soviet Union. I'm coming at you. If you're going to repress dissenting voices in the Soviet Union, I'm coming at you. But I love the fact he supported Nelson Mandela. Oh, yes. I can agree with that part of the Soviet Union when it was in place and we had the old Communist Party, you see. And I learned from, you know, Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois's and the Claudia Joneses, the Mary Barakas and so many others who were communists. But I'm not a communist, brother. I'm just a revolutionary Christian trying to love my crooked neighbor with my crooked heart.
Well said, Dr. West. Quick question about foreign policy. Ukraine war and the conflict between Israel and Palestine. If you were president, what would you do in reference to those two particular situations?
For the Ukraine war, I'd do everything I could to stop it. Ceasefire. I'd sit down with the various leaders from Ukraine, Russia, and China, Turkey, those particular leaders who are interested in the possibility of a ceasefire. Too much suffering going on. In going into the dialogue, I would be very clear. It's a crime against humanity in terms of the invasion of Iraq by the Russian Empire. I'd be very clear about that. No doubt. At the same time, expansion of NATO, provocation to the Russian Empire. Each must take responsibility. We're leading toward nuclear war. Too much suffering already. And more arms, more support generates more war. I have deep disagreements with Biden and the Democratic Party in that regard. And he come back and say, oh, does that mean that the Ukrainians mean nothing to you? Quit lying about me. Not at all. Not at all. I don't want one more killed at all. Israel, Palestine, understand, as I said, you got the clash. Jewish security, Palestinian dignity. Jewish safety, Palestinian justice. How are you going to speak to both at the same time? Well, the first thing you do is dismantle occupation. First thing you do is pull back on militarizing any conflict because Israeli defense forces have been excessive and running wild in killing innocent Palestinian brothers and sisters. And if it were the other way around, there would be worldwide calls for boycotts and sanctions, and rightly so. We must never leave our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters feeling as if they are thoroughly abandoned as their children are being killed. 551 of them in 51 days, and not one major Democrat or Republican say a mumbling word. That's morally obscene. And when you have that kind of indifference, don't think that it's not manifest in your domestic policy. Poor people also perishing, hardly noticed in that sense. So what do? You sit down with Israel. You have received all of this money military support, and so forth. If you do not dismantle the occupation, you will see that support called into question. And if you do not ensure that the human rights are protected of those Palestinians within Israel, you will see similar kinds of action. And I meet with the Palestinians and say, you also have responsibility. I don't have a minute to put up with anti-Jewish hatred. If I see this kind of ugly characterization of Jews that are similar to what has been the characterization of Jews negatively for 2,000 years, as president, I will call it into question. But then I'll bring in the legacy of Edward Said, who is himself as Palestinian as any of our Palestinian brothers and sisters in the West Bank and Gaza, and say, we must create a culture and modes of perception in which you view even your Jewish enemies as fellow human beings. We know what they've done to you for all these years. There's no way you can create a future for your children if you do not ensure that you'll be able to either come together or, at least in the language of Albert Einstein, coexist in a binational social experiment. Federation is a whole host of different forms of it. The two-state solution once was trotted out, is now undercut with all the Israeli settlements. It's now impossible.
Right.
It's now
Right.
impossible.
That was something I was trying to explain to Marianne, is just that when you say two-state solution, the Palestinian Network did explain to those of us, the rest of us that RBN, that like this is not a feasible option for the Palestinian people because they're in the minority, they have less resources, and it's just like almost the equivalent of separate but equal, which did not work in the United States. It was separate, but it definitely wasn't equal. So I know it's
that's true. That's true. But also the land. You see, the land has been taken over by hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers. And so you don't even have the basis of the land anymore. When we were talking about this, Edward Said and I used to pick it in front of the New York Times just to get the use of the word occupation. They call it disputed territories. Disputed territories, y'all are occupying. And then they continued expanding. Democratic Party, Republican Party endorsing, expanding. It's more money and expanding and becoming more militarized and so forth, you see. So that's, unfortunately, now that's gone. Now, you know, when I hear this talk about, well, you know, we got to push our Jewish brothers and sisters to the sea. You see, I have no patience with that kind of language either. See, that's not a loving language in terms of a people who themselves have so often felt abandoned in a Gentile world with no one caring. That's what Hitler was about. That's what they felt, you see. And so the question becomes, how do you engage in creating a coordinated, coexisting binational state of federation or whatever it is with equal security, equal justice? We're not talking about Israeli state that's got all the ammunition and all the power and the Palestinian Pakistan that's dependent on it. No, those days are over too. Palestinian dignity means, in fact, Palestinian voices raised to shape their destiny based on a fair treatment of land and resources. Now, what is the definitive resolution? Nobody has that. We have to begin taking steps. Now we're taking steps in the opposite direction. And as you have neo-fascism escalating on a very high level, even given the limited Jewish liberalism that has been in place, now you just got outright Jewish gangsters who are in office in Israel. And thank God you've got a number of very decent Jewish brothers and sisters in Israel who are trying to call it into question. We'll see whether they have enough power, because it's almost Trump. It's fascinating to see these Democrats, the Charles Schumers and others, talk about Trump like a dog, but can't talk about Netanyahu like a dog. And you say, hey,
right.
You're a hypocrite, man. It's hard to take you seriously. If the American neo-fascist becomes the demon, but the Israeli neo-fascist becomes Israel has the right to survive.
Right.
Hey, let's be serious about this. And yet that's the stance of the Democratic Party. They ought to be ashamed. And the black politicians who go along with it, they ought to be ashamed.
Dr. West, how would you deal with groups like APAC, which have been basically raising money to push out progressive politicians that have spoken out, like Rashida Tlaib? APAC raised money against her to try to push her out from re-election. There were candidates that run, like Maxwell Frost, changed his position on Israel and Palestine, I think, so that this would not happen to him. How would you handle organizations or PACs like APAC that raise so much money to try to prevent voices like yours from getting in?
Well, I would never isolate Israeli lobbies or Jewish brothers and sisters or any other particular lobby. I would come up with campaign finance laws that would hold across the board. See, I would never treat lobbies tied to Jewish issues different than corporate lobbies tied to like the Chamber of Commerce and so forth. All of these are lobbies. You got tons and tons of lobbies that are out there. APEC is one particular lobby. We have to have a campaign finance law that holds across the board, that includes the fact that they can't give all this money to Sister Nina Turner's opponent 1 week before in order to push her out because she's a progressive voice, even in a decrepit, corrupt Democratic Party. Nina Turner's serious sister. And we've got some folk in the Democratic Party who are still trying to hold on, and God bless them. I'm just not convinced as they are that the Democratic Party will ever be a major force other than the corporate wing that shapes its destiny, you see. But I mean, people can disagree with me. You know, I don't have a monopoly on truth or nothing. Like I said with Brother Bernie, he jumped on Biden right away, and I thought he was wrong and things, but I love the brother. You know, he's been a force for good. He's just we were going a different way. That's all. We're going a different way.
So another question that I have for you in reference to Bernie Sanders. Bernie had started a movement, and then, after he lost in 2016, 2020, the rest of us just kind of stood around like, what do we do now? Because Bernie is not a part of this movement anymore. He's kind of left his movement. In the event you build a strong movement through the People's Party, through your campaign, in the event that you do not win, I think what some people may want to know is, will Dr. West still be around for that on the ground grassroots momentum that was built up? So, for example, if we have rallies, anti-war rallies or Medicare for all marches, would Dr. West still be involved and participate? Or would you kind of go the way of Bernie Sanders and say, okay, I lost, that's it, I'm out?
Well, I mean, but Bernie's not out though. He's running that committee, which is powerful, but it's within the auspices of the neoliberal Democratic Party. But he's still out there fighting within those constraints. It's just very narrow constraints. Myself, I'm much more tied to movements. I would not be inside of the system in that sense. I would still be anti-imperialist. I'd be critical of predatory capitalism. I'd be in solidarity with my sisters wrestling with patriarchy, deep solidarity with precious trans, who are the most vulnerable right now in terms of the vicious attacks coming at them, as well as gay brothers and lesbian sisters. And that's just going to be the case as long as I'm breathing. Now, I might be walking with a stick and I can't break dance no more. I can't move as fast as I used to. But as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to be at those rallies. You got no standing rock. I may have to get a special little way of getting there and get there late, a little CP time. But I'm going to get there because I want to be with my people. And my people are people who are suffering, oppressed people, you see. So no matter what, I would be somewhere in that struggle. But that's been my life for 55 years, going back to high school when Martin was shot and we shut down the high schools in Sacramento on the chocolate side of town and insisted they have Black studies. Glenn Jordan and Kenneth Jones, Professor's mother just passed, and Melissa Lawson, all chocolate folk. And we vowed, we made a covenant with each other. We were going to be faithful unto death. And each one of us have been, in our own distinctive way. Not because we're so good, but because we want to bear witness to the love that's been poured into us. And that's what Malcolm, that's what Ella did. That's precisely with Stevie Wonder. That's precisely what Curtis Mayfield, Nina Simone, Gil Scott Heron. They poured that love into us. Donny Hathaway, we shall never forget you. Watch us in our witness. That's what it's all about. Then you go to the grave with a smile on your face with style.
Well said, Dr. West. All right, Dr. West, I have a few more, I think 3 more questions for you.
Sure, absolutely.
Shama Sawan started this organization called Workers Strike Back. I'm sure you're familiar with Shama, where she's trying to organize, workers across the country and unionize these workers. And I think the first step is Amazon, from what I understood, trying to unionize them across the country. Do you foresee either yourself, your campaign, or the People's Party trying to collaborate in some way, shape, or form with Workers Strike Back and unionizing the people?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would even use a stronger word than collaborate. Genuine solidarity at its deepest level. They have a strike, be there. If they're moving against the powers that be, raise voice and body, be there. My dear sister from Seattle, we go all the way back because when she first came in, she had these major forces against her because you got so many of the powers that be, big tech there. She's been magnificent. I have tremendous respect for her. And as you probably know, we were able to push through the anti-caste discrimination. Mm-hmm. Why? Because our precious Dalit brothers and sisters have the same value as each and every one of us. Thank God she was willing to do that. Now California, they're trying to push it through with Sister T and Brother Suraj and a whole host of other Dalit brothers and sisters who I'm blessed to work with. But when it comes to the trade union movement, there can be no major move toward fundamental transformation of our society without the trade union movement playing a very important role. Because the predatory capitalist processes obsessed with profit have to be targeted. It's just that it can't be a trade union movement that is so narrowly reformist that it's only concerned about concessions and unconcerned about other crucial issues of injustice as opposed to just their wages. They have to have a broader view, and my dear sister understands that very well. So my answer to the question is absolutely yes.
Awesome. Then the other question I have, 2 more questions I have for you. You mentioned Chris Hedges and you mentioned Medea Benjamin.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea who your campaign manager would be? And if so, can you share that information with us? And what do you think Chris and Medea's roles would be in reference to your campaign?
Well, no, I appreciate that, because the thing is that Brother Nick Brown, founder of the party, has been leader of the party, even given all the different charges against him and what have you. And I still understand him playing a very, very important role in terms of his history and his present. And so we have to be able to hit the issues of the charges against him head on. And it's true, that he brought it to me as campaign manager in that sense. And so it's not going to be a question of me in any way trying to, what would be the right way, trying to act as if he has not been indispensable in preserving the party, and I would not have a campaign without the party and his invitation. But the question becomes, how do we collectively speak to these particular challenges? And how do we ensure, most importantly, that it is not a distraction from the people's business? We keep the focus on the suffering and the resistance and the need for institutional and infrastructural development. You see? So that's how I respond to that particular question. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm a little bit concerned with if it were me, I would make Chris Hedges your campaign manager. And if it were me, I would be a little questionable about Medea, because I feel like you can't be in 2 places at one time.
Well, she's such an activist. She's in so many places. That's true.
She is, but I mean, you can't be at a squad event one night and saying hanging out with the squad on Twitter, and then at the
I
same
see.
time trying to work with the third party route. For me, you got to pick one, Medea. So you can't do both, because then I'm kind of looking at you sideways. You working with the Democratic Party, or you working outside the Democratic Party? So that's me. I've had a lot of experience with people infiltrating groups, Dr. West. So I just get worried when I hear that.
I see what you're saying. No, but I think you also have to consider, my dear sister, you tell me what you think, that if you are improvisational and if you're a person of integrity, then you can come to terms with even bourgeois Democratic Party politicians on particular issues. You see, I can spend time with Brother Ro Khanna when it comes to Medicare for all, because he's down for it. That doesn't mean that I'm part of the neoliberal network, the Democratic Party. Doesn't mean that even he has a certain kind of progressive, which is overweighted with the corporate wing. But if it's Medicare for all, then I'm with him. Let's go with it, Ro. And same would be true with Rashida on Palestine. I'm not going to stay away from her because she's in the Democratic Party and she's speaking the truth about Palestinian suffering. So there have to be ways in which we can come together on issues. I can come together with Barbara Lee in California. We go back 40 years with Ron Dellums and so forth. You see, I think that she, in many instances, had progressive voices. We invited her to Princeton when she had death threats, when she was the only one that voted against the Iraqi war. That's serious business. She put her life on the line as a member of the Democratic Party on that issue. Not a member of the party. She's a member of the party. Ooh, we different. We still very different. But you see what I mean? I think there's ways in which we have to be able to move improvisationally on different issues, because these issues affecting the people. And when you have a deep focus on the people, you got to try to zero in on their needs. It could be food, it could be healthcare, it could be quality education. And if there's folk who are contributing to that, who have different ideological groups that they're a part of, you can still fuse with them. But does that make sense to you?
It does. I get nervous about the Democratic Party co-opting movements.
No,
I get nervous.
Oh, yes. That's very true. I'll give a good example. The great William Barber himself and Sister Thea Harris, Poor People's Campaign. You see that's so crucial. My beloved wife Anahita and I were there for 10 hours. The Poor People's Campaign, one, because I love Brother Barber. I met him when he was a graduate student at Duke and Divinity School, and he's been courageous. And people say, well, sometimes he's tied to certain elements of the Democratic Party. Absolutely. He's working in the Black community. He's working in the progressive community. And you got some folk on those issues that they're pushing, but they're unable to push it through the party because the party's not making poverty a priority. How many politicians showed up at the Poor People's Campaign? We were there for 8 hours. It looked like the number of Black folk in the National Hockey League. That's how many congressmen were and women were actually there. So they made it clear. They made it clear. But that doesn't mean that he won't have some openness with certain progressive Democrats who are trying to raise issues as it relates to hitting the child poverty, hitting poverty as a whole. We saw the same thing with Marion Wright Edelman. It's one of the great prophetic figures of the 20th century coming out of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer's movement with the Children's Defense Fund. For almost 50 years, she's raising the issue of child poverty. She had to deal with certain Democrats because she's trying to get some policies, but she was not co-opted. You see, she kept the focus where it belonged so that she could see where they would get cowardly and spineless. She could see, but she could put pressure on it. She could try to push and then get pushed back. That's what I mean by being improvisational, but you're absolutely right. The Democratic Party can co-opt you, and social movements do often die when they find themselves incorporated within the Democratic Party.
All right, Dr. West, 2 questions. If you were president, this issue with Julian Assange, he's in Belmarsh. I personally, as an Assange activist, I do not want him to be extradited back to the United States because I think that is going to be a death sentence for him. What would you do in reference to the issue with Julian Assange? Would you free Julian Assange on day 1?
Pardon immediately. Snowden 2. Mubi Abu-Jamal 2. Minnie, Leonard, the whole, we can go right across the document. Sada Shakur, come on home, sister. Come on home, if you want to. If you want to, you see. And I say that in the name of truth and justice. People say, oh, Brother West doing that because he's got a black bias or a bias toward indigenous people. Well, I do love them, but no, I'm talking about those who've been treated unjustly, those who've been incarcerated unjustly. H. Brown right now in Arizona, who's Iman Amin now. There's a whole host of them. And it wouldn't be just black folk. There's a whole host of political prisoners in the history in jail right now who should never have been there, who ought to be released immediately. Now I know that's going to create all kind of mess, and I'm going to tell them, that's right. I'm a funk master. I ain't going to deodorize, sanitize, or sterilize any of these policies. This is looked at from the vantage point of the suffering of poor and working people whose heroes are often unjustly incarcerated and have to pay a price beyond measure. And the least I could do if I got access to power is to give them a few years so they could spend time with their loved ones. Give them a few years of what it's like to get outside of that prison. When I saw Brother Mumi Abu Jamal, me and Brother Chris Hedges went there and spent 7 hours with him with the great James Cone, the founder of Black Liberation Theology. He was a freer man on death row than many folk walking the streets freely. That's the kind of spiritual strength he had. And he still had love in his heart, deep love in his heart, just like Emmett Till's mama. I don't have a minute to hate. I'll pursue justice for the rest of my life. That's what's still in the heart and soul of Mumi Abu Jamal. It's Julian and Ed Snowden and the others who reveal so many of the war crimes of the American empire. They ought to be acknowledged as those who've contributed to truth and justice. They ought not to be marginalized and demonized the way the corporate media and other elites do that.
That's right. All right, Dr. West, a final question. When all this is said and done and the cows come home, in the event you do not win, are you going to tell your supporters to support Joe Biden because we don't want to end up with a Trump-like figure? Or are you going to tell your supporters you need to protest, do a protest vote?
I'll tell you, I'm in it to win it. And I'm in it to go to the end. There's no doubt about it. If the Democrats want to win, then they need to put out a candidate that can steal my thunder. And if not, it's clear that they are willing. They're willing to think that they own other people's votes, that people are forced to vote for a Biden with all of the militarism, all of the legacy of mass incarceration, all of the turns away the poor people. I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful thing with the pandemic and the relief bill. But what happens? It expires. Child poverty goes right back again. Lets me know no serious commitment to it. No serious commitment to it. That's what burns me up, you see. And so in that regard, let them put forward a quality both candidate and quality program. Steal my thunder. Because I'm going to go down speaking my truth and promoting justice. Now, I know you got people, oh, Brother West was Brother Lance Tribe of Harvard. It's just nothing but ego vanity. Oh, so now all that I do is reduce the ego vanity. I'll be dang. Isn't that something? Appreciate the effort, Brother Tribe. But when you're bearing witness to something bigger than just choice between freaking frack and Tweedledee and Tweedledum, when you're concerned about the folk who suffer under your Democratic Party regime, then you have a different way of looking at the world. If you're looking at the world through a neoliberal lens, then it's the lesser evil solely. And there's some insights there. I'm not denying some of the insights. But if you're looking at it in a deeper way in the long run, in terms of the fascism sooner or later taking over and the poor folks still pushed out with austerity programs as the military expands, then your very neoliberalism is contributing to the fascism. And when you look at it from the vantage point of that precious West Bank baby, that bomb is still being dropped, no matter what party is in the White House. That's my vantage point.
And I totally hear you, Dr. West, but I think the thing is like, in the end though, because we there's no guarantees, like obviously, like there's no guarantee that you would win. In the end, would you tell your supporters to vote for Joe Biden? Like I can tell you, like for myself, if it were me, I would tell them not to do it. I would tell them this is not how we're going to get a third party movement going. If you continue to support the establishment Democrats, at some point we have to break away.
You've got to be able to decide that the alternative that you're promoting is one that is worthy, even if it looks as if it generates those consequences that people view as inconceivable. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And that's exactly where I stand. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Dr. West. Well, I said
thank you so very much. I know we had a good time. How long did we go today?
I don't know. I think I'm over your. I'm definitely over your time, but
no, but that's fine. That's fine. It's just a blessing to be in conversation. As I told you, my dear wife and I, Anahita, we watch you every night, and we're informed. We are illuminated, and you just stay strong. And God bless your family and your loved ones. You know.
Thank you, Dr. West. Good luck. And I will say I applaud you for running outside the duopoly. I know it takes a lot of courage to do so, and I'm just glad that somebody is stepping up to the plate.
Well, you stay strong now.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Appreciate
Bye.
you.